So you kids need to understand that private aviation isn't for everyone. Kyle Morrison's words echoed through Miami Executive Airport's exclusive terminal as he dismissed the two 17-year-old black students standing before his marble counter. Marcus and Miles Stanton held their charter documentation steady, their Riverside preparatory blazers and confident posture, marking them as products of elite education. Nearby passengers whispered and pointed, clearly assuming they were witnessing another attempt by ambitious teenagers to access luxury services far beyond their means. But something remarkable was about to unfold. The polite deference in Miles's expression vanished completely. His spine stiffened with quiet authority. When he reached for his phone and made eye contact with Kyle Morrison, there was a steel-cold certainty in his gaze that made the agent's smug confidence waver instantly. "We need to contact our father immediately," he stated, his tone shifting from respectful request to commanding declaration that sent chills through everyone listening. The bustling terminal atmosphere froze. Morrison's hands trembled slightly over his keyboard. The whispering passengers fell silent, sensing they had gravely misjudged the situation. Because what they had all witnessed was the moment two young men revealed they possessed far more power than anyone could have imagined. Airport's private aviation terminal hummed with its characteristic blend of understated luxury and controlled efficiency on this clear Tuesday morning in October. Skyline Executive Aviation's charter flight SE4471 to Boston was scheduled for an 11 a.m. departure, providing Marcus and Miles Stanton with what should have been ample time for standard processing procedures before their crucial college tour. The 17-year-old identical twins had invested months of careful planning into this journey. Marcus, with his exceptional 4.0 GPA and early acceptance into MIT's aerospace engineering program, carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who understood complex systems. Miles, whose perfect SAT scores had earned him scholarship opportunities at Harvard Business School, possessed an analytical mind that naturally identified patterns and inconsistencies in organizational behavior. Their father, Vincent Stanton, had made this trip possible as both a reward for their academic excellence and a test of their growing independence. For the first time, he had entrusted them with managing the complete logistics of corporate travel, from booking the charter through Skyline Executive's premium portal to coordinating their interview schedules with admissions departments at 3 prestigious universities. The charter confirmation they carried bore all the proper authentication codes and payment verification that should have guaranteed smooth processing. Their Riverside Preparatory Academy identification cards displayed the official seals and administrative signatures that marked them as students from one of Florida's most respected educational institutions. As they approached Kyle Morrison's workstation, the twins embodied the kind of quiet dignity and purposeful preparation that came from years of rigorous academic training and careful family guidance. Their expectations were simple: professional courtesy, efficient processing, and the same respectful treatment that every legitimate customer deserved, regardless of their age or appearance. Those expectations were about to be systematically destroyed. Kyle Morrison's initial assessment of the two young black men was filtered through years of unconscious bias and institutional assumptions about who belonged in luxury aviation environments. Despite their obvious education, proper documentation, and calm professionalism, something in his conditioning immediately labeled them as suspicious. "Charter confirmation and identification," he demanded, his tone carrying none of the warmth he had just displayed toward the middle-aged white businessman who had preceded them in line. Marcus carefully placed their documents on the polished counter surface, maintaining the courteous demeanor that had been instilled through years of navigating predominantly white educational environments. "Good morning, sir. We're checking in for charter flight SE4471, departing for Boston at 11. Morrison's examination of their paperwork went far beyond standard verification procedures. He held the documents up to overhead lighting, studied the printing quality with exaggerated suspicion, and cross-referenced information with the kind of scrutiny typically reserved for suspected forgeries or fraudulent transactions. "This charter assignment seems unusual for passengers your age," he announced loudly enough for nearby clients to overhear. "Where exactly did you obtain this confirmation?" Miles maintained his composure, despite the obvious implications of the question. Our father arranged the charter directly through your company's premium booking system. The transaction was completed and confirmed a week ago, with full payment processing. What Morrison failed to recognize was that both twins had spent countless hours studying aviation regulations, aircraft specifications, and industry protocols as part of their academic preparation for potential careers in aerospace engineering and aviation management. Their knowledge of Federal Aviation Administration requirements, charter documentation standards, and passenger rights exceeded that of many industry employees. "I'll need to run additional verification checks," Morrison declared, gathering their documents with obvious reluctance. "Please wait here while I confirm the legitimacy of this booking." He disappeared into a back office, leaving the twins standing at the counter for what would become a deliberately extended delay. Around them, other passengers continued to move through the check-in process with efficiency and professional courtesy, creating a stark contrast that was impossible to ignore. If you believe that Marcus and Miles deserve to be treated with the same respect as every other customer, regardless of their race, type respect below. The twins exchanged meaningful glances, both recognizing patterns of discriminatory behavior they had encountered before in various institutional settings. But something deeper was beginning to emerge in their awareness. Technical inconsistencies in Morrison's handling of their documentation that suggested more than simple prejudice was at work. What the airport staff didn't realize about these two students would soon terrify them. During their extended wait, Marcus and Miles observed the operational procedures around them with the analytical skills that had made them honor students. What they witnessed confirmed their growing suspicions about systematic discrimination, but also revealed something more troubling. "Miles," Marcus whispered quietly, "notice how Morrison processed that Bombardier charter for the gentleman behind us. The documentation protocol he followed doesn't match FAA requirements for charter verification." Miles nodded slightly, his business-focused mind cataloging the procedural violations they were witnessing. He's also bypassing the standard background check requirements that should apply to all passengers on private aircraft. The security protocols are completely inconsistent. Their conversation was interrupted by Morrison's return from the back office, carrying what appeared to be newly printed documentation and wearing an expression of barely concealed satisfaction. "I'm afraid there's been a significant problem with your charter booking," he announced with obvious pleasure. "Our system shows irregularities in the payment processing that require immediate attention and potential cancellation of your flight assignment." Marcus examined the supposed payment issue documentation with growing confusion and rising concern. The papers Morrison presented contradicted everything they knew about their father's meticulous approach to financial transactions and the confirmation emails they had received from Skyline Executive's automated systems. "This shows our charter was arranged and confirmed with full payment last week," Marcus pointed out, displaying his phone screen with the original email confirmation chain. "These cancellation documents don't align with the transaction records we have from your own company's booking system." Morrison leaned forward across the marble counter, his voice dropping to a hostile whisper designed to intimidate without creating a public scene. "Listen carefully, boys. Certain people need to understand that private aviation requires a level of financial capability and social standing that isn't accessible to everyone. You should be grateful that commercial airlines provide transportation options more suitable for your circumstances." The racial implications were unmistakable and deliberately cruel. Morrison had moved far beyond professional skepticism into overt discrimination that violated both company policies and federal civil rights protections. But what Morrison didn't realize was that his casual dismissal had just triggered something far more dangerous than teenage indignation. Miles's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, his analytical mind now focused on documenting every procedural violation and discriminatory statement for potential legal action. "Mr. Morrison, according to Department of Transportation Regulations 14 CFR Part 380, charter operators are prohibited from canceling confirmed bookings without specific documented justification. Could you provide the regulatory basis for this cancellation?" Morrison's confident demeanor wavered slightly. Most passengers, especially teenagers, didn't possess detailed knowledge of federal aviation regulations or the technical expertise to challenge his authority on procedural grounds. "I don't need to explain company policies to passengers," he replied defensively. "If you have problems with our decisions, you can file complaints through customer service channels." Marcus pulled out a small notebook and began writing down exact quotes, times, and procedural details. "For the record, Mr. Morrison, you've stated that certain people shouldn't expect access to private aviation and that our circumstances make us unsuitable for these services. You've also admitted to cancelling a confirmed charter without regulatory justification. Are you prepared to have these statements reviewed by both company management and federal transportation authorities?" The systematic documentation of Morrison's discriminatory behavior was creating an official record that could not be dismissed or denied. Morrison realized he was no longer dealing with intimidated teenagers, but with informed young men who understood their rights and possessed the knowledge to enforce them. "You boys are being deliberately disruptive and confrontational," Morrison said, his voice rising with defensive anger. "I'm going to have to ask you to step away from the counter so I can assist legitimate customers." The dismissal was final and brutal, but it had also provided the twins with comprehensive evidence of systematic discrimination that extended far beyond individual prejudice into institutional policy violations. As they moved away from the counter, collecting their altered documentation and Morrison's discriminatory statements, both twins were already mentally preparing for the broader investigation that would be necessary to address what they had experienced. Other passengers stared as they passed, some with apparent sympathy, but most with the smug satisfaction of having their unconscious assumptions about young black men confirmed by official airline action. But the twins' knowledge of aviation regulations was about to reveal something much darker. As Marcus and Miles retreated from Morrison's counter, they began connecting their experience to a larger pattern of institutional discrimination that extended far beyond individual prejudice. Their academic training in systems analysis and organizational behavior provided them with frameworks for understanding what they were witnessing. "So this isn't random discrimination," Miles observed quietly as they found a secluded area of the terminal. "Morrison's behavior suggests systematic training in exclusionary practices that target specific demographic groups." Marcus nodded. His engineering mind focused on the technical aspects of what they had experienced. "The way he handled our documentation also indicates familiarity with methods for creating plausible justifications for denying service. This appears to be standard operating procedure rather than individual bias." Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of Owen Mitchell, Skyline Executive Security Coordinator, whose presence immediately shifted the atmosphere around them from uncomfortable to potentially dangerous. "Gentlemen, I understand there's been some confusion about your travel documentation," Mitchell said with false pleasantness that fooled no one within hearing distance. "I'd like to help resolve any misunderstandings quickly and professionally." The twins recognized immediately that Mitchell's intervention represented an escalation rather than assistance. His positioning, body language, and tone suggested preparation for confrontation rather than conflict resolution. "Thank you for your concern, Mr. Mitchell," Marcus replied carefully. "But our documentation is completely legitimate and our charter was properly confirmed through official channels. The confusion appears to be internal to your organization rather than with our travel arrangements." Mitchell's expression hardened at the polite but firm challenge to his authority. "I'm going to need to examine your identification and travel documents more thoroughly. Please accompany me to a private screening area where we can address these issues without disturbing other passengers." The request was actually a directive disguised as courtesy, and the twins understood that refusal would likely result in more aggressive action. However, their compliance would also provide Mitchell with opportunities for more extensive harassment away from potential witnesses. "We're happy to cooperate with legitimate security procedures," Miles responded, "but we'd prefer to have any additional screening conducted in public areas where the process can be observed and documented by other passengers and airport personnel." Mitchell's jaw tightened with frustration at their refusal to be isolated and intimidated. "Gentlemen, I'm trying to handle this situation professionally and discreetly. Your continued resistance is making this more difficult than it needs to be." Sir Stadu, what Mitchell didn't realize was that both twins had been systematically documenting every interaction, every procedural violation, and every discriminatory statement since their arrival at the terminal. Their academic training had taught them the importance of comprehensive evidence collection when challenging institutional discrimination. "Mr. Mitchell," Marcus said calmly, "according to Transportation Security Administration guidelines, passengers have the right to request public screening procedures and to have witnesses present during security interactions. We're simply exercising those established rights." Mitchell's surprise at their knowledge of security regulations was evident and concerning. His standard intimidation tactics were proving ineffective against passengers who understood their legal protections and weren't afraid to invoke them. "Fine," Mitchell said with obvious irritation. "We'll conduct additional screening here, but I expect full cooperation and no further challenges to security protocols." What followed was a deliberately invasive and humiliating process designed to embarrass the twins and discourage any future attempts to challenge discriminatory treatment. Mitchell's examination of their belongings was unnecessarily thorough. His handling of their personal items was deliberately rough, and his commentary was intended to draw negative attention from other passengers. "A lot of technical documents and academic materials for high school students," Mitchell observed loudly, while examining Marcus's laptop. "You boys involved in any kind of activist organizations or troublemaking activities?" The question was loaded with racial profiling and designed to create suspicion among other passengers about the twins' presence in the terminal. Marcus's technical documents were actually aerospace engineering research papers and aviation regulation summaries, the normal academic work of a student preparing for MIT's competitive program. "I'm studying aerospace engineering," Marcus explained patiently, "and those documents are research materials for my college preparation and scholarship applications." Mitchell's skeptical expression suggested he didn't believe a word of the explanation. He spent additional time examining every file, every document, and every piece of academic work, creating an obvious spectacle that drew stares and whispered comments from other travelers. But what they found in their scholarship files was even more shocking. During Mitchell's invasive examination of their personal documents, Miles noticed something that made his blood run cold. Among the papers Mitchell was reviewing with exaggerated suspicion were documents related to the Skyline Executive Educational Excellence Scholarship Program, an initiative designed to provide aviation industry opportunities for underrepresented students. The twins had been selected as recipients of these prestigious scholarships 6 months earlier, but the implementation process had been mysteriously delayed and complicated by administrative issues that no one could adequately explain. Now, watching Mitchell's reaction to their scholarship documentation, a terrifying possibility began to emerge. Miles's discovery of the scholarship connection transformed their understanding of what they were experiencing from individual discrimination into something far more systematic and devastating. The Skyline Executive Educational Excellence Scholarship Program was designed specifically to provide aviation industry opportunities for academically outstanding students from underrepresented backgrounds. Both twins had been selected from over 3,000 applicants nationwide based on their exceptional academic performance, demonstrated leadership potential, and commitment to careers in aviation and aerospace engineering. The scholarships included not only substantial financial support for college education, but also mentorship programs, industry internships, and guaranteed consideration for management training positions after graduation. "Miles," Marcus whispered urgently as they watched Mitchell's examination of their scholarship documents, "look at how he's handling those papers. That's not standard security screening. He's looking for specific information." Miles's business-focused analytical skills immediately recognized the implications of what they were witnessing. "This suggests that our scholarship status was known to airport personnel before we arrived today. The discrimination we've experienced might be specifically targeting scholarship recipients rather than random passengers. The possibility that Skyline executive employees were systematically discriminating against their own scholarship recipients represented a level of institutional corruption that extended far beyond individual prejudice into organized sabotage of the company's stated diversity and inclusion goals. Mitchell's continued examination of their academic records and scholarship documentation was revealing patterns of behavior that suggested familiarity with the program details and specific knowledge of their recipient status. "These scholarship awards seem quite generous for students your age," Mitchell commented loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. "I hope you boys understand the level of responsibility and professional behavior that comes with these kinds of opportunities. The implication that they were somehow unworthy of their academic achievements or incapable of professional behavior was both personally insulting and professionally damaging." Mitchell was creating a public narrative that painted them as charity cases, rather than merit-based scholarship recipients. But more troubling was his apparent knowledge of scholarship program details that should not have been accessible to security personnel during routine travel processing. "Mr. Mitchell," Miles said carefully, "our scholarship information should be confidential academic records. How are you familiar with program details that aren't included in our travel documentation?" Mitchell's momentary hesitation revealed that he had inadvertently exposed knowledge he shouldn't possess. His recovery attempt was clumsy and unconvincing. "All passenger information is subject to security review when necessary," he claimed weakly. "We maintain comprehensive databases on travelers who use our facilities." Marcus's engineering mind immediately recognized the technical impossibility of Mitchell's explanation. Airport security databases contained travel history and identification information, not detailed academic records and scholarship program data. "That's not accurate, Mr. Mitchell," Marcus stated firmly. "Federal privacy regulations prohibit the inclusion of educational records in transportation security databases. Your knowledge of our scholarship details suggests access to confidential information through unofficial channels." The twins had just exposed a significant procedural violation that suggested coordination between airport personnel and other parties with access to their academic information. The systematic nature of their discriminatory treatment was becoming increasingly clear and increasingly criminal. Mitchell's aggressive response confirmed their suspicions about institutional coordination. "You boys are asking too many questions and making accusations that could get you into serious trouble. I suggest you accept our security decisions and avoid creating problems that might affect your future travel privileges." The threat was explicit and designed to silence them through intimidation about potential consequences for their scholarship status and academic opportunities. But what Mitchell didn't realize was that his threats had just provided additional evidence of systematic coordination between multiple levels of Skyline Executives organization in discriminating against scholarship recipients. As their extended security screening finally concluded, both twins were processing the implications of what they had discovered. Their individual experience of discrimination was actually part of a broader pattern of sabotage, targeting the very program designed to provide opportunities for students like them. The delay had also created additional problems for their travel schedule. Their first college interview was scheduled for 3:00 p.m. at MIT, followed by important meetings with Harvard administrators. Missing their charter flight would mean missing opportunities they had worked years to earn. But more importantly, they had uncovered evidence of institutional discrimination that extended far beyond their personal situation into systematic sabotage of educational opportunities for minority students throughout the aviation industry. What they discovered about their own scholarships would destroy everything they thought they knew about opportunity in America. As they prepared to proceed to their departure gate, both twins were secretly documenting everything they had learned about the scholarship program sabotage. What they didn't know was that one phone call would expose decades of institutional discrimination and transform the entire aviation industry forever. The departure gate area should have provided relief from the systematic harassment they had endured throughout the terminal, but instead it represented the final barrier between them and the educational opportunities they had worked so hard to earn. Gate agent Olivia Pemberton managed the boarding process with mechanical efficiency, that became noticeably strained when the twins approached with their disputed documentation. "Charter confirmation and identification," she requested, though her tone suggested she was already familiar with their situation through communication with Morrison and Mitchell. Marcus presented their original email confirmation alongside the altered cancellation documentation Morrison had provided, creating a clear contrast between legitimate booking records and suspicious administrative changes. "Our original charter was confirmed and paid for last week," Marcus explained methodically, "but Mr. Morrison created this cancellation notice without providing regulatory justification or company policy explanations." Pemberton's examination of their documents was perfunctory and dismissive, suggesting she had already received instructions about how to handle their situation. "The check-in agent made appropriate adjustments based on system alerts," she replied, without looking up from her computer screen. "If there were errors in your original booking, they've been corrected through proper channels." Miles pulled out his phone to display the complete email confirmation chain from Skyline Executive's automated booking system. "These records show our father arranged this charter through your premium corporate portal, with immediate payment processing and confirmation. This isn't a booking error. This is an unauthorized cancellation." Pemberton finally looked up from her screen, but her expression suggested she was being asked to solve an impossibly complex problem rather than verify a simple charter booking that should take seconds to confirm. "I don't see any formal complaints filed through our customer service department," she said with bureaucratic indifference. "Even if there was some kind of system error, the aircraft is already configured for the current passenger manifest." It was a transparent lie that everyone involved recognized. The Gulfstream G650 was configured to accommodate up to 19 passengers in luxury seating arrangements, and Pemberton had complete authority to restore their charter booking with minimal system adjustments. Marcus's analytical mind focused on the technical impossibility of her claims. "Ms. Pemberton, according to FAA charter regulations, passenger manifests can be modified up to 30 minutes before departure with proper documentation. Our original booking provides that documentation." Pemberton's hostility increased in response to their knowledge of aviation regulations. "Recording in the gate area isn't permitted under federal aviation regulations," she snapped, when Miles began documenting their interaction, though she was completely misrepresenting actual policies. "We're documenting customer service interactions for potential civil rights complaints," Miles replied calmly, "which is protected activity under federal law." That's when Marcus noticed something that changed everything. While Pemberton continued her bureaucratic obstruction, Marcus observed the boarding process for other passengers and noticed a pattern that confirmed their worst suspicions about systematic discrimination. Two young Latino men, approximately their age and carrying similar charter documentation, were being processed through an identical sequence of delays, additional scrutiny, and procedural obstacles. Behind them, a young black woman with professional attire and legitimate business documentation was experiencing the same pattern of harassment and obstruction. "Miles," Marcus whispered urgently, "look at passengers 7 and 12 in the boarding line. They're experiencing identical treatment patterns to what we've encountered." Miles's business training immediately recognized the systematic nature of what they were witnessing. This wasn't random discrimination or individual prejudice. It was organized institutional policy, targeting specific demographic groups for exclusion from luxury aviation services. The scope of the discrimination extended far beyond their personal situation into a comprehensive system designed to prevent minority passengers from accessing private aviation regardless of their legitimate business needs or financial capability. "This is systematic exclusion," Miles observed quietly. "They're implementing coordinated discrimination policies across multiple departments and personnel." But their observation of the broader pattern was interrupted by the arrival of Captain Preston Harrington, Skyline Executive's senior pilot, who had been monitoring the situation from a distance and decided that direct intervention was necessary. Harrington commanded significant respect and authority throughout the organization, but unfortunately, like many of his colleagues, he had developed deeply ingrained assumptions about who belonged in luxury private aviation. "Good afternoon, gentlemen," he said with false pleasantness that fooled no one. "I understand there are some concerns about your travel documentation that need to be resolved before boarding." Preston took their documents and began examining them with theatrical suspicion, holding them up to overhead lighting, comparing them to information on his tablet, and frowning as if he had discovered major security concerns. "These documents show several inconsistencies that require additional verification," he announced loudly enough for other passengers and airport personnel to hear. "Please step aside while I confirm their authenticity through appropriate channels." The real truth about Skyline Executive was finally emerging. Captain Harrington's intervention revealed the depth of institutional coordination in the discrimination they were experiencing. His examination of their documentation was pure theater, designed to create the appearance of legitimate security concerns while actually implementing systematic exclusion policies. "The formatting doesn't match our standard charter confirmations," Harrington claimed, fabricating technical problems that didn't exist. "There are also irregularities in the booking codes that suggest potential document alteration." Marcus examined their charter confirmation with growing frustration and analytical precision. The document had been printed directly from their email that morning and showed absolutely no signs of tampering, modification, or alteration. "Captain Harrington," Marcus said with forced patience, "this confirmation was generated by your own booking system and contains all proper authentication codes. Which specific formatting elements do you believe have been altered?" Harrington's inability to identify actual irregularities exposed the fraudulent nature of his claims, but he doubled down on his accusations rather than acknowledging his error. "Student identification can be easily fabricated with modern technology," he declared, while examining their Riverside Prep IDs. "I need more official government-issued documentation." Miles's business training recognized the systematic moving of goalposts designed to create impossible documentation requirements. "Captain, we're 17 years old and don't have driver's licenses yet." Skyline Executive specifically confirmed these IDs were sufficient when our father arranged the charter booking. These stories of injustice and courage inspire people all around the world to stand up for what's right. Let us know what country and city you're watching from, so we can see how far these powerful messages of equality are reaching across our global community. Harrington reached for his radio with obvious drama and self-importance, preparing to escalate the situation into a security incident. "Security to departure gate SE4471. We have a situation requiring immediate assistance." The announcement echoed through the terminal, causing nearby passengers to stop their conversations and stare at what appeared to be the apprehension of two teenage criminals. Some pulled out phones to record what they assumed would be an arrest. But what happened next would expose the systematic nature of Skyline Executive's discrimination policies and the institutional coordination that made such widespread prejudice possible. Simone Bradford, Skyline Executive's operations supervisor, approached the gate area with the authority of someone who had spent 15 years climbing the corporate ladder through careful navigation of discriminatory systems. As a black woman in aviation management, she had learned that survival required never making waves, never challenging the status quo, and certainly never taking the side of passengers who complained about discrimination. Bradford had become exactly what the company needed, a minority face in management who provided perfect cover for policies and practices that disproportionately affected people who looked exactly like her. "What seems to be the issue here, Captain Harrington?" she asked, already knowing the answer and preparing to support whatever discriminatory actions her colleagues had taken. "These two are claiming their charter documents are legitimate," Harrington explained, deliberately mischaracterizing the entire situation. "They're making serious accusations when I'm simply following standard security protocols." Bradford examined their charter confirmation and student IDs with the same suspicion and hostility her white colleagues had shown, her expression suggesting she was dealing with obvious troublemakers rather than legitimate customers with proper documentation. The betrayal was devastating. Here was someone who should have understood their situation instinctively, someone who had probably faced similar discrimination herself, someone who should have recognized the systematic pattern they were experiencing. Instead, She was actively perpetuating the very system that oppressed them all. Is there some specific reason you can't follow our standard boarding procedures like every other customer? She asked, her tone sharp with disapproval and barely concealed contempt. Marcus felt the crushing weight of institutional betrayal as he realized that Bradford's position in the company hierarchy was being used to legitimize discrimination rather than prevent it. Ms. Bradford, Marcus said carefully, we've been following your procedures all day. We've been subjected to additional screening at every checkpoint, had our legitimate charter illegally cancelled, and now we're being accused of fraud for attempting to board with proper documentation. Bradford's expression hardened further, her disapproval becoming more obvious and aggressive. I don't appreciate your attitude or your accusations, young man. If you continue making unfounded claims against our professional staff, I'll be forced to deny you boarding entirely and have you removed from the premises. The threat was crystal clear: accept discriminatory treatment quietly or face arrest and permanent exclusion from the facility. Miles looked at his brother, seeing his own sense of defeat and despair reflected in Marcus's eyes. They were exhausted, frustrated, and rapidly running out of options. Their college interviews were scheduled to begin in just a few hours. The systematic discrimination had been devastating when it came from white employees, but this betrayal by someone who should have been an ally felt like the final crushing blow. What followed would destroy every assumption the staff had made. The systematic coordination of discriminatory actions had reached a level that made normal boarding procedures impossible. Marcus and Miles found themselves facing not just individual prejudice, but institutional policy that seemed designed specifically to exclude them regardless of their legitimate documentation and legal rights. Logan Fletcher, Skyline Executive's onboard services coordinator, represented the final barrier between them and their aircraft. His lazy authority and casual discrimination had been perfected through years of making snap judgments about passengers based on their appearance rather than their credentials. Most legitimate passengers flowed past Fletcher with minimal interaction. A quick glance at documentation, a professional nod, and efficient boarding with courtesy and respect. But when the twins approached after their extended ordeal with multiple employees, Fletcher's demeanor immediately shifted into the familiar pattern of suspicion and hostility. "Hold on there," he said, stepping directly into their path and blocking access to the aircraft entrance. "I need to double-check something important with your reservations." Fletcher's examination of their charter confirmations was an elaborate performance designed to create maximum delay and public embarrassment. He consulted printed manifests that clearly didn't contain the information he claimed to be verifying, created artificial complications that required additional verification, and ensured that other passengers were forced to wait behind them in line. "These seats were supposed to be assigned to other passengers," Fletcher announced loudly, though he was clearly reading from no official document. "There seems to be major confusion about your boarding eligibility and seat assignments." Marcus's patience, worn completely thin by hours of systematic mistreatment, finally approached its absolute limit. Every employee they had encountered had implemented the same pattern of discrimination, each adding additional layers of harassment and humiliation. "There's no confusion whatsoever," Marcus stated firmly, his voice steady but filled with righteous anger. "This is the charter we arranged through legitimate channels. We've been harassed, delayed, and discriminated against at every step of this process, and we're not going to accept any more lies or procedural violations." The direct challenge to Fletcher's authority represented a fundamental shift in the power dynamic. Marcus was no longer requesting consideration or pleading for fair treatment. He was demanding compliance with established procedures and legal requirements. Fletcher's face flushed with rage at being confronted so directly and publicly by someone he viewed as having no legitimate authority to challenge his decisions. "That's it," Fletcher snarled, reaching for his radio with obvious satisfaction. "Security to JetBridge SE4471. We have disruptive passengers requiring immediate removal from the aircraft boarding area." Within minutes, Tom Bennett and Frank Miller appeared, two security guards approaching with aggressive postures and hostile demeanors that suggested they had already decided the twins were criminals before hearing any explanation of the situation. "What seems to be the issue here?" Bennett asked. addressing Fletcher directly rather than the twins, making clear whose version of events he was prepared to believe without question. These two are refusing to accept their charter cancellation and making false accusations against airline staff, Fletcher explained, creating a completely fabricated narrative. They're becoming increasingly disruptive and interfering with normal boarding procedures for legitimate passengers. Miles maintained his composure despite the mounting pressure and systematic intimidation. We are not being disruptive in any way. We're simply trying to understand why our completely legitimate charter keeps being questioned, cancelled, and blocked by employees who seem determined to prevent us from traveling. Miller, the larger and more intimidating security guard, stepped forward with obvious intent to physically intimidate the teenagers. His positioning and body language were designed to create psychological pressure and suggest that resistance would result in physical consequences. "Sir, I need you to immediately lower your voice and cooperate fully with airline personnel," Miller said in a tone that suggested non-compliance would result in arrest. "Any further resistance or disruption will result in your removal from these premises and potential criminal charges." The jet bridge had transformed into a public theater, where other passengers were openly recording the confrontation as the situation escalated beyond what anyone had anticipated. Some passengers looked genuinely sympathetic, recognizing obvious discrimination, while others seemed convinced they were witnessing the rightful apprehension of troublemakers. But Marcus wasn't finished. With the same analytical precision that had made him Riverside Prep's most respected student leader, he pulled out his phone and began making what would prove to be the most consequential call in Skyline Executive Aviation's corporate history. The consequences of that phone call were just beginning. As security guards positioned themselves around the twins and airport personnel prepared for what appeared to be an inevitable arrest, Marcus and Miles exchanged a meaningful look that communicated years of shared understanding and family preparation for exactly this type of systematic injustice. "We're calling our father," Marcus announced, his voice cutting through the chaos with absolute authority and unwavering confidence. Something fundamental in his tone, not pleading, not desperate, but coldly certain and completely controlled, made everyone present pause in their tracks. Fletcher, who had been gesturing dramatically to security guards, stopped mid-motion. The guards, who had been preparing to physically remove the twins, hesitated uncertainly. Other passengers pressed closer, sensing that the power dynamic was about to shift in ways no one had anticipated. For the first time all day, Marcus Stanton sounded exactly like someone who possessed real, substantial, and potentially devastating power. The phone call connected immediately, and the voice that responded carried the unmistakable authority of someone who was accustomed to being obeyed without question by powerful people in positions of significant responsibility. "Marcus, son, tell me exactly what's happening there. Take your time and give me every detail," the voice said with calm precision that suggested both deep concern and absolute capability to address whatever problems had emerged. Fletcher tried desperately to interrupt the conversation and regain control of the rapidly deteriorating situation. "Sir, you cannot make personal phone calls during active boarding procedures. This is a violation of federal aviation regulations and—" "Mr. Fletcher," the voice from the phone cut him off with surgical precision and ice-cold authority, "this is Vincent Stanton. You will not interrupt my son again, and you will not make any further attempts to intimidate or silence him." The blood drained completely from Fletcher's face as the implications of that name hit him like a physical blow. Vincent Stanton wasn't just any concerned parent making empty threats. He was Skyline Executive Aviation's owner, CEO, and the man who signed Fletcher's paychecks and had the absolute power to end his career with a single word. The twins looked at each other in genuine surprise and growing amazement. They had always known their father was successful in the aviation industry, but they had never fully understood the true extent of his influence, power, and authority within the private aviation sector. "Now," Vincent continued, his voice carrying across the jet bridge for everyone present to hear clearly, "I want you to listen very carefully to what my sons are about to tell you about their experience today. Because what you and your colleagues have done isn't just morally wrong and legally questionable. It's about to cost Skyline Executive Aviation everything it has worked to build. The silence that followed was absolutely deafening. Security guards stepped back uncertainly, suddenly realizing they might be on the wrong side of a situation that was spiraling far beyond their understanding or control. Fletcher looked like a man watching his entire career collapse in real time. Other passengers pressed even closer, sensing they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years to come. Captain Preston Harrington, who had been monitoring the situation from his position near the aircraft entrance, emerged with obvious concern and growing panic as he began to understand the magnitude of what was unfolding before his eyes. "Mr. Stanton," Preston said, his voice shaking slightly as he tried to salvage an increasingly impossible situation. "I'm Captain Harrington. I'm sure we can resolve any misunderstandings quickly and professionally. There may have been some communication errors or procedural confusion." "Captain Harrington." Vincent's voice turned even colder and more dangerous. "There have been no misunderstandings or communication errors. What has happened here today is systematic, deliberate and documented racial discrimination against my sons by multiple employees of my company. They have been harassed, humiliated and threatened with arrest for the crime of attempting to use a charter service that was legitimately purchased and properly confirmed." Vincent's words hit like hammer blows, each accusation more damning than the last. The scope of what had occurred was becoming clear not just to the immediate participants, but to everyone within hearing distance who was recording and live-streaming the confrontation. "Marcus Miles," Vincent said, his voice softening when he addressed his sons directly, "I need you to stay exactly where you are and continue documenting everything that happens. Don't move from that location. Don't accept any offers or compromises from airline staff, and keep recording every interaction. I'm implementing Emergency Protocol Alpha immediately." The twins exchanged confused glances. Having never heard of such a protocol in all their years of listening to their father discuss business matters and corporate operations. "What's Protocol Alpha, Dad?" Miles asked with genuine curiosity and growing anticipation. "You'll understand in approximately 2 minutes," Vincent replied with grim satisfaction and barely controlled anger. "And every single person who treated you like criminals today is about to learn exactly why I kept my ownership of this company private, and why that was the biggest mistake they could possibly have made." Throughout the terminal, departure boards began flickering ominously with updates that would send shockwaves through the entire private aviation industry. Charter after charter, flight after flight began showing the same unprecedented status. Delayed operational review required. "What's happening to all the flights?" someone in the growing crowd asked, with mounting alarm and confusion. Vincent's voice carried a tone of grim satisfaction mixed with righteous anger as he explained the scope of his response to the systematic discrimination his sons had endured. "Emergency Protocol Alpha means that every single Skyline executive aircraft currently on the tarmac, at gates, or in preparation for departure is being immediately grounded pending a comprehensive investigation into discriminatory practices and systematic civil rights violations. No Skyline executive aircraft will move until I am personally satisfied that this company deserves to operate, and that every employee understands that discrimination will not be tolerated under any circumstances." The magnitude of Vincent Stanton's response left everyone speechless and struggling to comprehend what they were witnessing. Fletcher, who moments before had been aggressively confronting 2 teenagers with the confidence of someone who held all the power, now looked like a man facing his own professional execution. What happened next would shock everyone in the aviation industry. The immediate aftermath of Vincent's emergency protocol implementation transformed Miami Executive Airport into the epicenter of a rapidly expanding crisis that would redefine the entire private aviation industry's approach to customer service and civil rights compliance. Kyle Morrison, the ground operations supervisor who had initiated the twins' ordeal by canceling their legitimate charter, appeared at the jet bridge with obvious panic and desperation written across his face as he realized the magnitude of what his discriminatory actions had unleashed. "Mr. Stanton," Morrison said breathlessly, his voice trembling with fear and desperate hope for mercy, "I'm Kyle Morrison from ground operations. If there were any errors in processing today, I'm sure we can resolve them immediately and get your sons on their way without any further delays or complications." "Mr. Morrison," Vincent replied with ice in his voice and zero tolerance for excuses. You personally told my sons that certain people need to understand that private aviation isn't for everyone. You cancelled their legitimate charter without justification, accused them of fraud, and suggested they should be grateful that commercial airlines exist for people in their situation. Would you like to explain exactly what you meant by those comments? Morrison's face went white as he realized that every discriminatory word he had spoken was being quoted back to him verbatim, apparently from detailed records that had been maintained throughout the day by witnesses, security cameras, and the twins' own documentation efforts. Sir, I think there may have been some misunderstanding about my comments, Morrison said desperately, his career flashing before his eyes. I was simply following standard verification procedures and company policies. Mr. Morrison, Vincent cut him off ruthlessly. My sons have recordings of your exact words. Security cameras captured your behavior, and multiple witnesses observed your discriminatory actions. There was no misunderstanding. There was deliberate, systematic racism directed at paying customers because you made assumptions based entirely on their race and age. Owen Mitchell, the security agent who had subjected the twins to invasive and unnecessary searches, appeared next, his face flushed with the dawning realization that his career was in serious jeopardy and that his actions were about to face comprehensive review. Mr. Stanton, I want to clarify that all security procedures were conducted according to standard protocols and federal regulations, Mitchell said desperately, trying to create legal cover for his discriminatory actions. Mr. Mitchell, Vincent replied with barely controlled fury, you subjected my sons to invasive searches that violated their privacy and dignity, examined their personal electronics without legal authority, and made public comments about being extra careful with these types. And you then attempted to prevent witnesses from documenting your discriminatory behavior. Which federal regulations authorize racial profiling and illegal searches based on skin color? The question hung in the air unanswered because everyone present knew that no such regulations existed, and that Mitchell's actions had violated multiple federal civil rights protections. But the most devastating revelation was yet to come, as Vincent's investigation into the day's events had uncovered something far more systematic and troubling than individual employee prejudice. Furthermore, Vincent continued relentlessly, I have spent the last 2 hours reviewing security footage, customer service records, employee communications, and scholarship program files from today's events. What I've discovered is that this systematic discrimination against my sons was not an aberration. It was entirely consistent with how this company has been treating minority customers for years, while I trusted others to maintain our standards. The words hit like a nuclear explosion throughout the terminal. Vincent Stanton wasn't just angry about his son's treatment. He was acknowledging that their experience had exposed a corporate culture that had systematically failed the very principles he thought he had established. More importantly, his investigation had revealed the connection between the twins' discriminatory treatment and the systematic sabotage of the Skyline Executive Educational Excellence Scholarship Program that was designed to provide opportunities for students exactly like Marcus and Miles. The scholarship program sabotage represents the most devastating betrayal of our company's stated values, Vincent announced to the growing crowd of passengers, employees, and media representatives who were documenting every word. My sons were not just discriminated against as random passengers. They were specifically targeted because they were scholarship recipients whose success threatened the prejudiced assumptions of employees who felt entitled to exclude minority customers from luxury aviation services. The scope of the institutional discrimination was staggering and went far beyond anything the immediate witnesses had imagined possible. This wasn't just about 2 teenagers being denied boarding. It was about systematic sabotage of educational opportunities for minority students throughout the aviation industry. What came next would expose the full extent of the conspiracy and deliver justice that would transform the entire industry forever. As Vincent's investigation continued to unfold in real time, the systematic nature of the discrimination became increasingly clear and increasingly criminal. Security cameras, employee communications, and digital records painted a picture of coordinated exclusion that had been operating for years under the cover of legitimate business practices. "Let me explain exactly what my investigation has revealed," Vincent announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the terminal as media crews arrived and federal investigators began coordinating with airport security. The Skyline Executive Educational Excellence Scholarship Program was designed to identify and support the most academically gifted minority students in America, providing them with pathways to careers in aviation, aerospace engineering, and aviation management. Over the past 3 years, we have awarded over 200 scholarships representing millions of dollars in educational support and industry opportunities. The crowd pressed closer as Vincent revealed the scope of what should have been a transformative diversity initiative. However, my investigation has discovered that scholarship recipients were being systematically flagged in our customer service databases, marked for additional verification, and subjected to discriminatory treatment designed to discourage their use of company services. The program was being sabotaged from within by employees who viewed minority success as a threat to their own positions and assumptions. Marcus and Miles exchanged shocked glances as they realized their individual experience was part of a much larger pattern of institutional betrayal that had affected hundreds of their peers across the country. Simone Bradford, the operations supervisor whose betrayal had been particularly painful for the twins, stepped forward with obvious desperation and fear as she realized the full scope of what was being exposed. "Mr. Stanton," Bradford said, her voice shaking with the realization that her complicity in the discriminatory system was about to be fully exposed. "I want you to understand that I always tried to maintain professional standards and follow company policies as I understood them." "Ms. Bradford," Vincent replied with profound disappointment and controlled anger, "you were specifically promoted to your supervisory position because I believed you would use your authority to ensure equal treatment for all customers, especially those who had faced discrimination in other contexts. Instead, you became complicit in perpetuating the very prejudices that undoubtedly affected your own career advancement." Bradford's position as a black woman in management had been used to legitimize discrimination rather than prevent it, providing the company with perfect cover for policies that systematically excluded minority customers while maintaining the appearance of diversity and inclusion. The investigation had also revealed that scholarship recipients' personal information had been illegally shared with airport personnel, creating databases that allowed for coordinated discrimination across multiple departments and facilities. Employee communications show that scholarship recipients were referred to as problem passengers, who required special handling to discourage their future use of company services, Vincent continued, his voice filled with disgust at the systematic betrayal of the company's stated values. Captain Harrington stepped forward one final time, his face pale with the realization that his career was ending in the most public and humiliating way possible. "Mr. Stanton, in my 15 years with this company, I've always tried to maintain the highest standards of safety and security," Harrington said, apparently believing this somehow justified his discriminatory actions. "Captain Harrington," Vincent replied with barely controlled fury, "you participated in systematic harassment of legitimate customers, created false security alerts to justify discrimination, and threatened to have scholarship recipients arrested for questioning your unprofessional behavior. Your 15 years of experience apparently taught you nothing about treating all customers with equal dignity and respect. The systematic coordination of discriminatory actions had created a shadow policy that contradicted every official company statement about diversity, inclusion, and equal opportunity. Employees had felt entitled to implement their personal prejudices as company policy, confident that their actions would be protected by supervisory complicity and institutional indifference. But Vincent's response went far beyond individual punishment or corporate policy changes. The exposure of systematic scholarship program sabotage had revealed the need for fundamental transformation of the entire aviation industry's approach to diversity and civil rights compliance. Effective immediately, Vincent announced, Skyline Executive Aviation will be implementing the most comprehensive anti-discrimination program in the private aviation sector, with mandatory training, anonymous reporting systems, and real consequences for verified discrimination. More importantly, we will be creating the Stanton Institute for Aviation Diversity, a national organization dedicated to identifying and eliminating discriminatory practices throughout the transportation industry. The transformation that followed would change everything forever. Within hours of Vincent Stanton's emergency protocol implementation and public exposure of systematic discrimination, Miami Executive Airport had become the focal point of a national conversation about civil rights, corporate accountability, and institutional transformation that extended far beyond the aviation industry. The consequences for the employees who had participated in discriminating against Marcus and Miles were swift, decisive, and comprehensive. But Vincent's response went far beyond individual punishment to address the systematic failures that had enabled such widespread discrimination to flourish under his leadership. Kyle Morrison's termination hearing revealed the depth of institutional bias that had infected the company's customer service operations. His attempt to provide defensive explanations during the disciplinary process only made his situation worse and exposed the systematic nature of the discrimination. "Mr. Stanton, I want you to understand that I was simply following procedures that I believed were in the company's best interests," Morrison said desperately during his recorded hearing that would become part of comprehensive training materials. "When I saw two teenagers with a high-value charter, I thought it was my responsibility to verify their legitimacy more carefully." "Mr. Morrison," Vincent replied with cold precision and documented evidence, "you didn't verify anything more carefully. You made assumptions based entirely on their race and age, cancelled their legitimate charter without justification, and when confronted with evidence of their legitimacy, you suggested they should be grateful for commercial airline options. That wasn't following procedures. That was implementing your personal prejudices as company policy." Owen Mitchell's disciplinary hearing was equally damning, as his attempts to justify the invasive searches and discriminatory treatment fell apart under comprehensive scrutiny and federal civil rights review. "Sir, enhanced security screening is sometimes necessary when dealing with unusual situations or suspicious behavior," Mitchell claimed weakly, apparently unaware that all his actions had been recorded by multiple security cameras. "Mr. Mitchell," Vincent responded with documented evidence and legal analysis, "what was suspicious about two well-dressed honor students with proper identification and legitimate charter confirmations? What behavior did they exhibit that justified invasive searches, examination of their personal electronics, and public commentary about being extra careful with these types? The only unusual thing about the situation was your decision to treat them differently based on their appearance. But the most significant transformation involved the systematic restructuring of company policies, procedures, and corporate culture that had enabled discrimination to flourish for years without detection or consequences. The Accountability and Justice Council that Vincent created brought together civil rights experts, former discrimination victims, community leaders, and, most surprisingly to outside observers, several of the employees who had discriminated against the twins but demonstrated genuine commitment to transformation and accountability. Kyle Morrison, after completing intensive sensitivity training and victim impact education, became one of the most effective advocates for systematic change within the organization. His transformation from discriminatory employee to civil rights champion demonstrated the possibility for genuine redemption and institutional healing. "I convinced myself that I was just doing my job professionally and following standard verification procedures," Morrison admitted during a recorded session that became part of mandatory training materials. "But listening to victim testimonials and examining my actual decision-making process, I realized I was creating different standards for different people based entirely on assumptions and stereotypes I didn't even consciously acknowledge I was making." The company implemented revolutionary changes that went far beyond standard diversity training or policy adjustments. Anonymous reporting systems allowed both customers and employees to flag concerning interactions without fear of retaliation. Customer satisfaction metrics were redesigned to ensure they didn't inadvertently penalize employees for enforcing policies equally across all demographic groups. Most importantly, upper management compensation became partially tied to diversity and inclusion metrics, creating direct financial incentives for executives to take anti-discrimination efforts seriously and implement systematic changes rather than superficial public relations gestures. The scholarship program was completely restructured, with external oversight, transparent selection criteria, and systematic protections against internal sabotage. Vincent established partnerships with 50 historically black colleges and universities to expand opportunities for minority students throughout the aviation industry. Financial analysts had initially predicted disaster for the company, with some forecasting significant market value losses as resources were diverted from operational efficiency to social justice initiatives. But something remarkable and unexpected happened instead. After an initial period of adjustment, Skyline executives' customer satisfaction scores began rising dramatically across all demographic groups. Employee retention improved significantly as staff reported feeling more valued, respected, and proud of their workplace environment. Several major corporations specifically switched their private aviation contracts to Skyline Executive, citing the company's ethical leadership and commitment to civil rights as factors that aligned with their own corporate values. What happened next would surprise everyone in the aviation industry. 1 year after the incident that had grounded an entire aviation company, Marcus and Miles Stanton stood once again at Miami Executive Airport's private terminal. They were at the same facility where they had been systematically discriminated against, the same terminal where they had been accused of fraud and threatened with arrest, the same location where they had been forced to document evidence of racism and fight for their basic dignity as human beings. But everything was fundamentally and dramatically different now. Sofia Rodriguez, the gate agent who checked their charter confirmation, did so with genuine warmth and professional efficiency that represented the new standard of customer service that had emerged from the company's comprehensive transformation. "Good afternoon, gentlemen. Boston again for more college visits?" she asked with authentic hospitality, processing their documentation without excessive scrutiny, and treating them with the same casual courtesy and respect she showed every customer regardless of their appearance or background. "Yes," Marcus replied, still slightly amazed that this ordinary routine interaction, completely unremarkable to most travelers, represented such a profound transformation from their previous devastating experience. They moved through security with minimal delay and appropriate professionalism. The screening process was thorough but respectful, conducted by agents who treated them as valued customers rather than potential criminals. Their belongings were handled carefully, their privacy was respected, and their documentation was processed efficiently without discriminatory questioning or invasive searches. The transformation extended throughout the facility and far beyond individual employee behavior, into systematic institutional changes that had created measurable improvements in service quality, customer satisfaction, and employee morale. As they boarded their charter aircraft, they were greeted by Captain Maria Santos, a Latina pilot whose natural hairstyle and confident demeanor would have been deemed unprofessional under Skyline executives' previous discriminatory policies. She represented the kind of authentic diversity the company now embraced, rather than merely tolerated for public relations purposes. "Welcome aboard, gentlemen," Captain Santos said with a smile that reflected genuine hospitality rather than artificial courtesy. "We're honored to be flying you to Boston today, and I hope you have a wonderful experience with Skyline Executive Aviation." The twins had become powerful advocates for systematic change, speaking at conferences, consulting with other companies, and working with civil rights organizations to implement similar accountability programs across various industries. Their story had inspired young people throughout the country and internationally, demonstrating that individuals could challenge discriminatory systems and create meaningful, lasting transformation. The Stanton Institute for Aviation Diversity had become a model for other industries, with its comprehensive approach to identifying, documenting, and eliminating discriminatory practices being adopted by companies in hospitality, healthcare, financial services, and technology sectors. Congressional hearings inspired by their experience had led to new federal regulations, requiring transparent reporting of discrimination complaints and standardized training for all transportation industry employees. The aviation industry as a whole had been forced to confront its treatment of minority customers in ways that would have been unimaginable before the twins' courageous stand for their dignity and rights. As their flight approached Logan Airport, Marcus opened his laptop to review his notes for the next day's presentation at MIT, where he was now a sophomore in aerospace engineering after deferring his admission by a year to work full-time on civil rights advocacy. Miles was studying international business and corporate ethics at Harvard, focusing his academic work on developing sustainable approaches to diversity and inclusion in global corporations. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our final descent into Boston," came Captain Santos's voice over the intercom. "On behalf of the entire crew, thank you for choosing Skyline Executive Aviation. We know you have many options in private aviation, and we're honored that you trusted us to provide not just safe and comfortable transportation, but service that honors the dignity and worth of every passenger who flies with us." The words represented a fundamental shift in how the company understood its mission and responsibilities. Transportation wasn't just about moving people efficiently from one location to another. It was about treating every human being with the respect, courtesy, and dignity they deserved, regardless of their background, appearance, or perceived social status. As they deplaned at Logan Airport, the twins were approached by a young black girl, perhaps 10 years old, traveling with her family to visit colleges with her older sister. "Are you the twins who changed the airplane company?" she asked with innocent directness. Marcus knelt down to the child's eye level, remembering his own feelings of vulnerability and determination exactly 1 year earlier. "We're Marcus and Miles. What's your name, sweetheart?" "I'm Zoe. My mom told me that you made it so people like us get treated the same as everyone else when we fly on airplanes." Miles felt tears forming in his eyes as he realized the profound impact of their courage. This child would never know the fear, humiliation, and systematic discrimination they had experienced. She would travel through the world with one less barrier to overcome, one less source of anxiety and stress, one less reason to feel like a second-class citizen in her own country. "That's exactly right, Zoe," Marcus said gently but firmly. "And you know what's most important? If anyone ever treats you unfairly or differently because of how you look, you have the right to speak up and demand better treatment. Your voice matters, your dignity is important, and you deserve to be treated with the same respect as everyone else." The child nodded solemnly, absorbing the lesson with the seriousness it deserved, then ran back to her parents, who smiled gratefully at the twins before disappearing into the bustling crowd of travelers. As Marcus and Miles walked through Logan's busy terminal toward their next chapter, they carried with them the profound knowledge that their courage had created something far more significant and lasting than individual justice. They had helped build a world where that little girl, and countless others like her, could travel with dignity and confidence, knowing that their rights would be protected and their humanity would be respected. The twins had begun their journey as passengers denied boarding due to racial discrimination. They were ending it as recognized leaders who had helped construct a more just and equitable society. One policy change, one training program, one transformed heart and mind at a time. Their father had been absolutely right about transformation requiring fire and struggle. But they had learned something even more important and powerful. When you refuse to be consumed or defeated by that fire, when you stand firm in your dignity and fight strategically for justice, you can use that very fire to forge something stronger, more beautiful and more equitable than what existed before their courage changed everything. The phone call that had grounded an entire airline had ultimately elevated an entire industry to higher standards. The discrimination that was intended to diminish and silence them had instead amplified their voices and their message across the world. The system that had tried systematically to exclude and marginalize them had been fundamentally transformed to protect and empower future generations. Thank you to everyone who typed respect, and to all who shared their locations from around the world. Your global support means everything. If these stories inspire you, please subscribe to join our community and help us share more incredible tales of courage and justice. Until next time, keep believing in the power of truth.